America in 2025 is basically one long, unhinged Tumblr post brought to life. We've got professional victims weeping because their taxpayer-funded gender studies project got cut, DEI warriors acting like they were just overthrown in a coup, and of course the usual hysteria about Trump single-handedly dismantling civilization. The left isn't just having a meltdown. They're making it a full-time job. And if you think this is just another episode of Orange Man Bad, buckle up because the delusions are about to hit at Mach 10.
National Cancer Institute funded study was terminated. I never received a written letter, but I was told to stop work immediately and that no more research expenditures would be allowed. My study to explore how to safely collect sexual orientation and gender identity in cancer care practices was in response to the American Society of Clinical Oncology, the American Medical Association, the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, and many other national professional standard-setting bodies that recognize that we need better data to create better clinical guidelines for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex people. Woo!
Now, let me see if I got this straight. This creature is yet another overpaid academic throwing a tantrum over losing her taxpayer-funded gender feelings research grant. This woman is actually devastated because the National Cancer Institute shut down her critical, life-altering, groundbreaking, checks notes study on how to safely ask cancer patients about their pronouns. Because, as we all know, one wrong question and bam, tumor metastasizes out of sheer offense. Who knew misgendering was the leading cause of stage 4 rectal cancer? Now let's dissect this circus. First, she says she never got a formal letter, just a verbal order to stop. Yeah, that's not how grant terminations work, sweetheart. Maybe they assumed you'd figure it out on your own, but given that your entire career revolves around stating the obvious with a government paycheck, I can see why they overestimated you. Then she throws out a bunch of acronyms, AMA, ASCO, USPSTF, because nothing screams serious science like name-dropping institutions that have turned into glorified diversity clubs. Here's the reality check, sweetheart. None of them said your specific study was necessary. They advocate for better medical data, not for some glorified HR manual on how to ask, hey, does your cancer identify as non-binary? Now let's talk about the elephant in the room. This was never about cancer. If it were, your research wouldn't hinge on whether or not the government keeps cutting you checks. Legitimate life-saving studies don't die the second a new president enters office. You think the scientists developing actual treatments for leukemia are sitting around going, damn, if only we had a government grant to study how bisexual tumors respond to radiation. Of course not. But that's the thing with DEI grifters. When their nonsense gets cut, they don't look for private funding because even woke billionaires won't throw money at this garbage. But the best part, she's not just sad about losing her job. She's acting like this is the downfall of civilization. My research was terminated. Lady, you weren't curing polio. You were making sure nurses don't ask the wrong pronoun before they stick in the chemo IV. Real scientists are out there mapping the human genome, inventing AI-driven cancer diagnostics, and actually saving lives. Meanwhile, you're crying because Uncle Sam won't fund your 10-year study on whether lesbian leukemia should get its own special pamphlet. If anything, the real scandal isn't that this was shut down, it's that it was ever even funded in the first place.
My research was terminated as a result of the president's executive orders, presumably the quote-unquote defending women from gender ideology, extremism, and restoring biological truth.
Yeah.
Despite this rhetoric, nothing in this order defends women. What this administration does best is to call something the opposite of what it is and repeat it over and over again until we're confused about words even mean or what is true. This is the oldest totalitarian tactic in existence. The Defending Women executive order declares that basic federal policy on truth is critical to scientific inquiry, public safety, morale, and trust in government itself. I couldn't agree more. But the order then proceeds to define sex as an immutable biological classification that erases the existence of 5.6 million U.S. residents born intersex. While doctors have hidden the bodies of intersex people for centuries, this does not change the fact that 1.7% of the population is indeed intersex. The World Health Organization has only in recent years demanded an end to stigmatizing and performing surgery on healthy intersex people. Likewise, dehumanizing transgender people and defunding LGBTQI research flies in the face of scientific truth and public safety. My colleagues and I have worked hard to make healthcare kinder, more affirming, and more accessible to the 7.6% of the U.S. population that identify as LGBTQ, particularly those affected by cancer. 1 in 10 people in the nation.
Wow, what a totally impartial scientist who just so happens to be a full-time DEI activist, giving us the world's most insufferable TED Talk on how she lost her taxpayer-funded pronoun pamphlet project. She's reading this meltdown off her phone with all the passion of a DMV employee rejecting her paperwork. And I gotta say, this might be the first time in history someone made losing their job sound more boring than the job itself. Well, all right, all that being said, let's break down the lunacy. First, she says her research was presumably terminated because of Trump's executive orders. Presumably. That's leftist code for I have no evidence, but it fits my victim narrative, so I'm running with it. Then, in a twist so ironic it belongs in a Shakespearean tragedy, she accuses Trump of using Orwellian tactics when her entire ideology is built on making words meaningless. We're living in a world where woman doesn't mean woman, man can mean anything, and gender is just a social construct. That is, unless you want bottom surgery. Then it's magically real. But sure, tell me more about who's confusing reality here. And then we get the biggest whopper. She claims defining biological sex erases intersex people. Sweetheart, you can't erase what your own side refuses to define. Also, that 1.7% intersex statistic she's throwing around, complete nonsense. That number is padded harder than a freshman's essay word count, including every minor genetic variation, even ones with zero medical relevance. The actual number of people with clinically significant intersex conditions is 0.018%, which means you are statistically more likely to get struck by lightning while holding a winning lottery ticket than be born intersex. But go off, Queen. Tell me again how doctors are out here hiding the bodies like we're in some gender-themed X-Files episode. Then, of course, we get the crocodile tears about how cutting DEI funding is dehumanizing and engendering trans people. Because, as we all know, nothing saves lives quite like redundant government bureaucracies micromanaging how doctors ask about pronouns. If her work was actually valuable, it wouldn't need government handouts. You think researchers working on real cancer breakthroughs are out here making GoFundMe pages because their study got defunded? No! But when your entire career revolves around making healthcare kinder instead of, curing diseases, yeah, I can see why the free ride ending feels like an extinction level event. And the cherry on top? She throws in the classic bloated LGBTQ stat, 7.6% of the population. Wow. It's almost like that number keeps climbing every time a new TikTok trend gets popular. Even if it were true, who cares? We don't have separate research grants for left-handed cancer patients, but somehow gender identity needs its own $1 billion budget. Newsflash. Tumors don't care about your pronouns. Your blood cells aren't unionizing for diversity quotas. If the only thing your research does is make hospitals more inclusive, then congratulations. You are running a glorified customer service training seminar, not an actual scientific study. Look, at the end of the day, this isn't about science. It's about a professional activist who got booted off the government payroll and now wants to convince us that her gender-themed Yelp reviews for oncologists were the backbone of modern medicine. If your research only existed because of an ideological handout, it wasn't research. It was a welfare program with a PowerPoint presentation. But don't worry, we got another lesbocrat to see if she can up that last chick's ante.
And frankly, I don't want to be here.
So go home. Get a job.
I want to be in my lab focusing on my research. I want to be building community with queer scientists that I have been proud to lead, but I can't. This is because on January 21st, the current administration instituted a ban on DEIA positions and programs in the federal government. Overnight, my group's website was taken down and colleagues I'd worked beside for years were out of a job. 2 years of our blood, sweat, and tears, building networks, fostering community, and many more of history before us, reduced to broken links and uncertainty. In the wake of such a clear attack on my queer colleagues, how can any of us go about our day-to-day work? Through community, we have found a way. Despite bans on presenting our research, halts on funding, and direct attacks on our identities, we have passed candidacy exams, been accepted to graduate school, all while raising our voices to protect our fellow scientists.
Oh, look. Another totally not retarded, tragic martyr for the cause of taxpayer-funded identity politics, bravely standing before a crowd to read a carefully curated meltdown off her phone. Probably typed between sessions of crafting the perfect LinkedIn post about oppression. She doesn't even want to be here, folks. She'd rather be in a lab. Doing what exactly? Testing beakers for homophobia? Running PCR tests to see if systemic bias is water soluble? Guess we'll never know because evil dictator Trump did the unthinkable, deleted her government-funded website. Now let's all take a moment of silence for the real victim here, her broken hyperlinks. I mean, forget global conflict, economic collapse, or actual medical research. Her networking website is gone. How will we ever recover? She acts like the Library of Alexandria burned down, when in reality, the government just hit Control-Alt-Delete on a pointless DEI vanity project. And this blood, sweat, and tears she and her colleagues allegedly put in. I'm sorry, but were they hand-knitting the pixels? What exactly was happening in this lab? Then comes my favorite part. She dramatically laments that despite this clear, targeted genocide against her email listserv, she and her fellow queer scientists somehow managed to pass their exams and get into grad school. Wow, so stunning. So brave, almost like cutting a government DEI department didn't actually stop anyone from doing science. It's almost like, and stay with me here, this was all unnecessary fluff and hand-holding that had nothing to do with research in the first place. You mean to tell me the field of cancer research didn't grind to a halt just because it was no longer a designated taxpayer-funded support group to validate everyone's pronouns? Oh, shocking. But the best part, she frames all of this as a direct attack on LGBTQ people. Like Trump personally rappelled into the lab at 3 a.m., spray-painted biology is binary on the whiteboards, and set fire to the pride flags hanging off the centrifuge. Let's be real. What actually happened was a normal budget cut to a useless bureaucratic subdivision of science. And the people who are pretending it was essential just don't want to get a real job. They're lazy. This isn't oppression. This isn't censorship. This is reality finally hitting people who thought they had a lifetime membership to the government grift train. At the end of the day, this speech isn't a rallying cry. It's a glorified LinkedIn sob story about a woman who thought she could make a career out of activism disguised as science. If she really wanted to help cancer patients, she'd be doing actual medical research. I know, crazy, right? Instead of whining at rallies about broken links. The real scientists, the ones in the trenches studying treatments and saving lives, yeah, they don't need a taxpayer-funded queer support group to do their jobs. Maybe it's time for her to learn that lesson too.
While some may think the administration's actions are a bold display of strength, I think they're a clear admission of fear. Yeah. This administration knows the power we have when we stand together, and that's why they're trying to undermine us. Yeah. You can eliminate DEIA. You can stall our research, but we are not going anywhere. Yeah. We will work together to protect every single one of us. Yeah. Fellow organizers, do not give them the satisfaction of succumbing to the overwhelm. Keep raising your voices. Yeah. Keep excelling at what you do and remind them why they should fear our power.
Yeah. Ah, yes, the greatest threat to the Trump administration, a government-funded activist class that can't survive without subsidies. Terrifying. Absolutely spine-chilling. Somewhere in Mar-a-Lago, Trump is probably quaking in his gold-plated boots, whispering, "Oh no, what if the DEI interns get mad at me?" Meanwhile, back in reality, these people just got their taxpayer-funded pity party shut down and are now standing on stage screeching into the abyss like an off-brand Les Miserables cast. Now, first we get her claiming that defunding DEI is a clear admission of fear. Fear of what exactly? The power of people whose entire careers evaporate the second federal funding gets pulled? Hate to break it to you, But if your movement collapses the moment the government stops handing out participation trophies, you were never powerful. You were a quite literal charity case. Trump didn't defund you because he's scared of you. He did it because the American taxpayer was tired of funding the gender studies mafia. Then comes the big dramatic rallying cry. You can eliminate DEI, but we are not going anywhere. Oh, I know. That's the problem. These people infest institutions like bedbugs in a college dorm room. You can bomb the place, but somehow a few always survive and start another grievance committee. But here's the hilarious part. No one actually cares if you keep your little activism hobby. You're perfectly free to hold your struggle sessions, write angry Medium posts, and cry on TikTok about how oppressed you are. You just have to do it on your own dime now. And that's what really terrifies them. And then, this is rich. She closes with, keep excelling at what you do and remind them why they should fear your power. Excelling at what exactly? Getting corporate HR departments to fire people for misgendering a stapler, running GoFundMe scams every time Starbucks runs out of oat milk. Because last I checked, no one is afraid of the pronoun brigade. The only thing that was ever scary about DEI was the insane amount of taxpayer money wasted on it. And guess what? That's gone now. At the end of the day, this speech isn't a rallying cry. It's a glorified job application for yet another useless NGO position. No one is coming for her. No one is silencing her. The only thing that happened is that she finally got a taste of what the real world is like, where you actually have to produce something of value instead of getting paid six figures to lecture people on privilege from a MacBook in a university-funded safe space. And now they're panicking because for the first time, the activism class has to pay its own bills. Let's see how powerful they are when they have to survive without a government-backed allowance. And speaking of retards, next up we have Illinois Governor Pritzker, who is as good at virtue signaling as he is at making every Democrat forget that he is quite literally a multi-billionaire. It makes you wonder why Democrats hate billionaires so much when they got them all over their party.
What comes next? After we've discriminated against, deported, or disparaged all the immigrants and the gay and lesbian and transgender people, the developmentally disabled, the women, and the minorities, once we've ostracized our neighbors and betrayed our friends, after that, when the problems we started with are still there staring us in the face, what comes next?
Oh, shut up.
All the atrocities of human history lurk in the answer to that question.
Oh, look, Governor Buffet Destroyer himself is back, and this time he's delivering the hottest new political fan fiction since The Handmaid's Tale. Apparently, Trump is going to deport every woman, gay person, disabled person, and minority straight under the sun. That's right, folks. Trump's master plan isn't fixing the border or handling crime. It's cracking open the book of Revelations and initiating the great purge of everyone who's not a straight white male from America. Let's dissect this fever dream, shall we? First, Pritzker starts with the slippery slope to lunacy fallacy because if we enforce immigration law, obviously the next logical step is rounding up disabled people like we're in a dystopian sci-fi movie. I mean, really? How does this work? Are ICE agents going to start randomly scanning people for scoliosis at Walmart? Will TSA start yanking women out of line like, sorry ma'am, but the patriarchy is in full effect now. Please board the deportation express. Even better, are they going to audit people's Grindr accounts to check if they're too gay for citizenship? This has to be the dumbest timeline ever. Then we get the real money shot, Pritzker's Holocaust reference, because, of course, everything is the Holocaust now. Enforcing basic immigration laws, Holocaust. Not funding your useless DEI job, Holocaust. Running out of oat milk at Starbucks, probably Holocaust. Everything is genocide if you whine hard enough. Never mind that Obama deported more people than Trump in his first term. Pritzker wasn't out here writing dramatic monologues about that. But now that Trump wants to actually enforce the border, suddenly we're all 2 weeks away from being stuffed into train cars. And let's talk about the real irony here. Pritzker, a man who treated Illinois like a dystopian hellhole during COVID, is suddenly concerned about government overreach. This is the same guy who locked his state down harder than Guantanamo, tanked small businesses, and shoved elderly COVID patients into nursing homes like he was playing Tetris with people's grandparents. But now he's out here acting like he's the last defense against authoritarianism. Please. It's evident this isn't about protecting anyone. It's about pandering to people dumb enough to believe Trump is personally leading a minority purge task force. Pritzker knows Trump's policies are normal, so he has to spice things up with a historical horror movie script. But normal people see through this nonsense. No one believes we're 2 executive orders away from sending the entire cast of RuPaul's Drag Race into exile. Pritzker just hopes his voters are dumb enough to believe his deranged political fanfic.
I do not invoke the specter of Nazis lightly.
Oh,
but
you
I know
don't?
the history intimately and have spent more time than probably anyone in this room with people who survived the Holocaust. Here's what I've learned. The root that tears apart your house's foundation begins as a seed of distrust and hate and blame. The seed that grew into a dictatorship in Europe a lifetime ago didn't arrive overnight. It started with everyday Germans mad about inflation and looking for someone to blame. I'm watching with a foreboding dread what is happening in our country right now. A president who watches a plane go down in the Potomac and suggests without facts or findings that a diversity hire is responsible for the crash.
He was right.
Or the Missouri Attorney General who just sued Starbucks, arguing that consumers pay higher prices for their coffee because the baristas are too female and non-white.
They're right.
The authoritarian playbook is laid bare here. They point to a group of people who don't look like you and tell you to blame them for your problems. All the atrocities of human history lurk in the answer to that question. And if we don't want to repeat history, then for God's sake, in this moment, we better be strong enough to learn from it.
Oh, Pritzker, you walking cheesecake factory of bad takes. And this time, he's given us a history lesson straight out of a doomsday Reddit thread. Apparently, if you dare to question DEI bloat, or think maybe, just maybe, we should have some control over who enters the country, congratulations. You're now an extra in the prequel to the Holocaust. But don't worry, he wants us to know that he's not invoking the Nazis lightly. No, he's just casually comparing standard governance to genocide like a completely normal and rational person. So let's talk about this historical fan fiction he's peddling. First, he warns that when a nation gets mad about inflation, it starts looking for someone to blame. Uh-oh. So what exactly is he suggesting here? That people angry about their groceries costing double are about 5 minutes away from forming death squads? This is truly the dumbest of the dumbest timelines. You know what else had inflation? The Jimmy Carter era, the 2008 recession, and yet somehow neither of those resulted in camps for marginalized baristas. But sure, keep pretending that Biden wrecking the economy is just the first domino toward mass executions. And let's talk about his evidence for his impeding dictatorship. First, he accuses Trump of blaming DEI hiring for a plane crash, which, funny enough, turned out to be completely true. Then he screeches about Missouri suing Starbucks because apparently pointing out corporate racial discrimination is now authoritarianism. Imagine thinking a lawsuit about overpriced coffee is one step of mass persecution. The mental gymnastics this man is performing could qualify for the Olympics. And just when you think this rant couldn't get any dumber, he ends with a classic, "What comes next?" hysteria. As if everything in history is destined to escalate into genocide. Let's be real, sometimes cutting a bloated DEI department just means cutting a bloated DEI department. Sometimes deporting illegal immigrants just means deporting illegal immigrants. And sometimes a morbidly obese governor rambling about Nazis just means it's a slow news day in Illinois. Anyway, since we're on the topic of DEI disasters, let's talk about the Delta flight operated by Endeavor Air that crashed in Toronto. Because, surprise, surprise, this happens to be the same small airline that's been obsessed with running all-female unmanned flights. And how do we know this? Well, because they boasted about it themselves. One of their TikToks, this one right here, where they proudly flaunt this ridiculous gimmick as if prioritizing quotas over competence is something to celebrate. Now, setting aside the hilarious irony of calling a crewed flight unmanned, this is exactly what happens when corporate wokeness turns into a full-blown safety risk. When you prioritize gender quotas over qualifications, you don't get empowerment. You get planes that don't stay in the air. But of course, the media would rather ignore the fact that this airline was running PR stunts disguised as flights and instead pretend this crash was just some unfortunate coincidence. If Endeavor Air spent as much time focusing on competence and training as they did on checking diversity boxes, maybe they'd have fewer headlines about planes hitting the ground. And speaking of hitting the ground, oh boy, did Gayle King crash and burn in this interview with Delta CEO.
The Trump administration recently fired many employees of the FAA administration. Do those cuts worry you, and do you think that impacts the safety? I know you just said it's the safest way to travel, but after looking at all these mishaps, a lot of people are very nervous. Do these cuts affect you?
The cuts do not affect us, Gayle. I've been in close communication with the Secretary of Transportation. I understand that the cuts at this time are something that are raising questions, but the reality is there's over 50,000 people that work at the FAA, and the cuts, I understand, were 300 people, and they were in non-critical safety functions. The Trump administration has committed to investing deeply in terms of improving the overall technologies that are used in the air traffic control systems and modernizing the skies. They've committed to hiring additional controllers and investigators and safety investigators. So no, I'm not concerned with that at all.
Oh look, another tragic case of Trump derangement syndrome live on air, this time starring Gayle King, who was so confident she had a smoking gun that she practically leaned in, waiting for Delta CEO to break down sobbing about how Trump personally planted explosives on every Boeing 737. Instead, she got hit with a cold, hard reality that her narrative was about as airworthy as a Spirit Airlines discount flight. So let's break down her pathetic attempt at a gotcha question. First, she sets up the ambush, lacing her question with a classic media manipulation. Trump fired FAA employees, planes crashing, coincidence? The goal is obvious. Say something vague, hope the audience is dumb enough to connect dots that don't exist, and pray the interviewee is too polite to correct you. But unfortunately for Gayle, she wasn't talking to some brain-dead CNN pundit. She was talking to a competent adult with access to actual numbers. And then the kill shot. The Delta CEO instantly dismantles her fake scandal with one inconvenient little fact. The FAA has over 50,000 employees, and its so-called mass firings were 300 non-critical roles. That's 0.6% of the workforce. You lose more people than that to a single bad Taco Bell lunch, but Gayle wanted you to believe that Trump went in there with a chainsaw, personally decimated air travel, and now planes are plummeting from the sky like Biden's poll numbers. And here's where the hypocrisy really shines. The media has spent years screeching that Trump bloats the government, but the second he trims a handful of bureaucratic fat, suddenly he's an aviation terrorist. And let's not forget, while Gayle King was busy fear-mongering about imaginary layoffs, the Delta CEO calmly reminded everyone that Trump is actually increasing investment in air traffic control and hiring more safety personnel, meaning not only was her question based on complete fiction, but it actually accidentally made Trump look better. Bravo, Gayle. You just played yourself. I think it goes without saying that none of what we saw was actual journalism. It was just an embarrassing attempt to turn a normal government policy into a doomsday scenario. Gayle King was salivating for a headline, but instead she got publicly fact-checked and left looking like a gullible moron. And the best part, the sheer disappointment in her voice and the way she looked straight into the camera, just completely baffled when the Delta CEO didn't play along. It was like watching a kid open a Christmas present and find a pair of socks instead of an iPad. Absolutely priceless. At the end of the day, this isn't just about one botched media hit job. It's about the broader game being played right in front of us. How many times have we seen this exact formula? A prepackaged narrative, a leading question, and the sheer palpable disappointment when reality doesn't cooperate. The real question isn't whether the media will keep peddling these lazy, dishonest setups. We already know they will. And the question is, why do they think people are still stupid enough to fall for it? How many more times do they have to be caught red-handed before the average person finally asks, wait, how much of what I hear is complete nonsense? Because if they're willing to blame a plane crash on Trump without a shred of evidence, what else are they rewriting, manipulating, or outright fabricating to fit their agenda? Calling Governor Pritzker? The answer is as uncomfortable as it is obvious. So the next time you hear one of these breathless, pre-scripted media panic attacks, ask yourself, is this news or is this just another cheap attempt to control what I think? You tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.